The Sorceress and the Poet. Where did all the old stories come from? They were gifted to the world long ago by poets. And who was the greatest poet of ancient times? To answer that, we must start with the sorceress, a noble lady Cardiwen. Cardiwen was a woman of great power, a renowned mistress of magic. She was married to a lord and had 3 children. Her elder son and her only daughter were both as fair as a spring morning. However, it's their youngest child who concerns us. This is a boy named Avagadu, who was born under an ill star. Cardiwen loved Avagadu best of all, but feared he was too feeble to make his way in the world. So she decided to brew a potion of inspiration to help him. She hoped this would overcome his disadvantage, enabling him to outshine his rivals and perhaps win a place to serve the king. She filled a cauldron with rare herbs and water, built a fire in a secret corner of her garden, and set the cauldron on top. Then she commissioned 2 trusty people to keep it simmering. One was Morda, an elderly serving man who she tasked with feeding the fire with logs. The other was a boy named Gwynbach. His job was to stir the cauldron with an enormous spoon, every hour, all through each day and night. Keep up this work without resting for a whole year, she ordered them, and at the end of that time, once the brewing is complete, I shall pay you both generously. But listen, do not taste even a single drop of the potion. If you disobey me, you will die on the spot. They diligently obeyed her instructions. For almost 12 months, Morda never let the fire go out, and Gwynbach kept on stirring. Slowly, steadily, the brew became richer and more pungent. By the last day of the final month, the potion was so thick that Gwynbach could scarcely move his spoon through it. As he struggled to do so, 3 drops of the liquid suddenly splashed onto his finger. It was so excruciatingly hot he forgot Cardiwen's warning and thrust the scalded figure into his mouth to cool. In this way, he accidentally swallowed some of the potion. Despite her warning, it did not kill him. However, its effect was overwhelming. Almost at once his head began to explode, the chaos of dazzling image and words. They gushed through him like a river in a spate and filled his whole being with desperate longing. He must string them together. He must shape them into prophecies, weave them into stories, shout them out into poems and songs. He must work them into spells. But old Morda saw what happened and cried, "You're in mortal trouble now, boy. Quickly, run for your life before Carterwin comes." So, his head still ablaze, Gwynbach fled. The next moment, the cauldron cracked in 2, spilling the remains of the brew into an enormous puddle. But Gwynbach knew nothing of this as he ran through the fields, crawled under the hedges, and hid in the ditches, desperate to escape Carterwin's anger. She came at dawn the following morning. It should have been the happy day when the potion was finally ready for her son, but instead, she found the cauldron burst. The liquid spilled and the fire reduced to ash. She seized a heavy stake and made to strike the hapless Morda. However, he stopped her with a roar. "Don't hit me, foolish woman! It's Gwynbach who caused this disaster." "Then he will not get away with it," Cardiwen cried. Power surged through her veins. She sniffed the air, scraped the ground with her naked foot, tested the winds with a raised finger. Thus, she quickly divined which way the boy had gone, and started after him. But thanks to the magic potion, Gwynbach knew that Cardiwen was coming after him. A spell rang through his mind, he chanted it out loud, and at once was transformed into a hare. In this shape he ran on, now 3 times faster than the wind. Cardiwen saw what he had done, and immediately turned himself into a greyhound, quickly gained on Gwynbach, and drove him into the banks of a rushing river. Gwynbach jumped into the river with an eerie cry, and transformed into a fish. Cardiwen turned into an otter, and dived in after him and chased him to the surface. In his fish form, Gwynbach could not breathe there, so he transformed into a small bird and flew up towards the sky. Cardiwen screeched and turned himself into a peregrine falcon, shot after him like a lightning bolt, and harried him hither and thither. Gwynbach flew through the open door of a barn, transformed into a grain of wheat, hid amongst the thousands of identical grains scattered across the floor. Cardiwen cackled, knowing that she had him cornered now. She turned herself into a hen and scratched around the floor. It did not take her long to find the grain that was really Gwynbach. She pecked him up and swallowed him. 9 months passed. The Lady Cardiwen gave birth to her 4th child. It was another boy, conceived from the grain of wheat she had eaten. Her enemy, Gwynbach himself, come back to life, but she could not bring herself to harm him, so she gave him a new name, Taliesin. Then she wrapped him in a leather bag and entrusted him to God's care by casting him out to sea. What became of Cardiwen and her own other children after that is not recorded, but Gwynbach, now reborn as Taliesin and set adrift, there was much more to tell. Further up the coast, there lived a young lord named Elphin. One evening, he went out riding along the river to the estuary where a weir had been set up to trap fish. A leather bag was snarled up in one of the poles. Elphin thought it might contain something valuable, so he untangled it and then opened it. To his astonishment, he found nothing inside but a tiny boy. It was the strangest child he had ever seen, the size of a newborn baby but with the physique of a youth. When Elphin had recovered from the shock, he carefully placed the boy onto the ground. There, like yeast dough left in a warm place, he rapidly began to grow. "Who are you?" Elphin cried in astonishment. "Where have you come from?" The boy, now as high as Elphin's waist, only grinned at him, pointing silently at the horse. "Do you wish to come home with me?" asked Elphin. The boy had now grown to reach Elphin's shoulder. A nod was his reply. Elphin lifted him onto the saddle behind him, and they started off at a trot. As they went, the boy suddenly broke his silence and began to chant in a curious, mesmerizing voice. "Greetings, friends! Talison's my name. I drank the potion and fled in shame from the sorceress Cardawin, devoured by her, then born again. Generous man who set me free, thank you again for my liberty." Elphin had no idea what he was talking about. Yet there was something appealing about the Fey boy. When they finally reached the family home, Elphin's parents were too charmed and offered to foster the boy. Under their care, he flourished, while a canon of enigmatic poems grew inside his head. Time went by, as it does, and Taliesin returned into a man. One day, Elphin invited Taliesin to join him at the feast thrown by the ruler, King Malgwyn of Gwynedd. Halfway through the feast, Malgwyn summoned his bards to step up and perform. They recited an endless series of praise poems to their king, following by a tedious history starting with the most distant ancestors, rumbling on and on. All the guests sat there politely, desperately trying to hide their boredom and impatience. Suddenly, Elphin rose from his seat, pointed at Taliesin, and shouted, enough of these humdrum verses, your majesty. I have a bard of my own who is far more skillful than yours. His poems will fill you with wonder. You should hear him." King Malgwyn was outraged by this audacity. He ordered Elphin to be seized, thrown into the dungeon, and confined there in chains. In the commotion, Taliesin tried to dart away and conceal himself, but he was quickly spotted in the shadows, dragged out, and forced to stand before the king. "So," Malgwyn growled, "you must be the wretched rhymester who my prisoner dared to claim is superior to my own world-famous bards, eh?" Taliesin stood, glaring at Malgwyn brazenly for a long moment. Then he cleared his throat and made his answer in verse. "Indeed, sir, Talison's my name. The whole world soon will know my fame. Lord King, I stand here not for sport. I'd like to entertain your court. But first it falls to prove to you what Elphin claimed is really true. Throughout the world, outside or in, the greatest bard is Taliesin. No peace will come till you agree. Restore my brother's liberty." "How dare you tell me what to do?" cried Malgwyn. Talison's reply was a grim warning. "Lord King, don't argue, but beware, for danger's coming from out there. A monster's rising from the mud. No flesh, no souls, no bones, no blood. Brings teeming rain and glowering skies. The sea will churn, the wind will rise. Merciless it's sure to bring a dark vengeance on you, foolish king." The next moment there was a deafening clap of thunder outside, followed by gusts of wind so strong that they rattled the heavy doors and windows in their frames, enveloping the entire hall in an icy chill. Rain and hailstones drummed against the walls and the roof slates as if they would batter the whole castle right now. Above this clamor rose the king's distraught voice, pleading, "Taliesin, call off the spell at once. I submit to you. I agree to free Elphin, and I would declare you to be the greatest poet in the land. I offer humble apologies for doubting your skills. I beg you to join my court as chief bard. Will you accept?" "Certainly," Taliesin called back. "Then subdue this tempest, I implore you. Save my castle from destruction." Taliesin snapped his fingers, muttering a stream of words under his breath in a language no one recognized. Gradually, the noise outside quieted, the rain ceased, and the wind faded away. "It is done," said Taliesin. "Now take me to Elphin, my foster brother, and let me oversee his release." The king himself led the way down steep, dank steps to the dungeon. Behind them came workmen with saws to break the chains binding the captive's wrists and ankles. But before they could work, Taliesin spread out his hands to stop him, stepped forward, and cried at the top of his lungs, "Let me speak my magic art. Chains of bondage break apart." At once, the chains melted clean away, and Elphin stepped out of them. The king shook his head in astonishment, then led the way back up to the steps, with Taliesin and Elphin walking directly behind him. At the top, they found the royal bards waiting in line to pay homage to their new chief. Taliesin stood quietly to receive their acclaim. After this, the feast was concluded, heralding the king's customary time to enjoy some bardic poetry. This time, none dared to speak except for Taliesin himself. Standing on the dais before the assembled guests, he no longer looked like a reckless youth. Instead, he had now had the bearing of a sagacious dignitary, and the words he spoke were profound, complexity crafted in open verse. "Friends, I bring you mystery to ponder. Why is a stone and a thorn so sharp? Who is all at once as hard as flint, salty like brine, and sweet as honey? Whose steed is a gale? Which is whiter, salt or snow? Why is a tongue gifted with speech? What is lovelier than the sun's smile? No one could offer answers to these mysterious questions, and Taliesin did not enlighten them. In this way, the evening drew to a tranquil end. Then the entire court and the king's guests were all bedded down in the great hall around a fire. They awoke the next morning to a new era, in which the art of poetry and the stories it shapes had gained equal status to the art of war. So it has been in the Celtic land ever since, and the name of Taliesin the Bard has never been forgotten.